Welcome, my friend. I'm thrilled you found your way to my channel. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone close to you. It truly helps me out. Drop a comment with your location. I appreciate all of them. Dylan steered the car into the driveway, brought it gently to a halt, and let out a long breath. The day had left him utterly depleted, back-to-back meetings, looming deadlines, and tough decisions at every turn. More than anything else, he longed for the comfort of home, a quiet meal with Sophie, perhaps ending the evening curled up together watching a film. But when he entered the house and stepped into the living room, he was met by an unusual stillness. Sophie sat on the sofa, and the look on her face was instantly familiar to him, a mixture of apprehension and contemplation he had seen before. It was her expression when she was holding back words that truly mattered, when something significant pressed on her mind. Without saying a word, Dylan slipped off his shoes, set his briefcase carefully in the corner, and quietly crossed over to sit next to her. Her hands were clenched tightly in her lap, as though she was gathering her resolve. There was a heaviness in the atmosphere, but he knew instinctively that pressing her would do no good. So he sat beside her in silence, offering his presence as a signal that he was ready to listen whenever she found her voice. After what felt like a long pause, Sophie finally lifted her gaze to meet his and began to speak, her voice deliberate and measured, as if she was weighing every word. She began by reflecting on the ease of their marriage, the comfortable routines, the solid partnership they had cultivated over the years. She reassured him of her love, but admitted that lately something felt absent, a subtle but persistent void she couldn't quite define, but could no longer ignore. Dylan listened closely, still unsure where this conversation was headed, nodding gently to show that he was with her. Then, after a deep breath as if steadying herself, Sophie revealed what had been occupying her thoughts. She wanted them to try something different, something bold, to infuse new energy into their relationship. Her words were careful but clear. She was proposing they visit a swingers club together. The suggestion landed with a jolt. Dylan blinked, momentarily frozen as her proposal sank in. A swingers club? The thought had simply never occurred to him before. Though his mind surged with questions, he restrained the urge to interrupt, instead focusing on her face, trying to understand what might have led her here. Sensing his discomfort, Sophie quickly tried to reassure him. She emphasized that she wasn't dissatisfied in their relationship, far from it. She deeply valued the life they shared and all they had built together. But recent conversations with friends had sparked a curiosity she couldn't shake, making her wonder if exploring this together could allow them to reconnect in a fresh and meaningful way. Inside, Dylan felt conflicted emotions swirling. Part of him recoiled, unsettled by the idea, while another part appreciated her honesty and the vulnerability it took to voice such a suggestion. He realized she hadn't spoken lightly. She must have wrestled with these feelings for some time before sharing them. And although the idea felt alien to him, he respected her openness. Remaining quiet, he studied her carefully, realizing she wasn't asking for an immediate decision. What she sought was simply a willingness to talk, to explore the idea together without judgment or haste. Though unsure and uneasy, Dylan acknowledged that he owed her that much, not because he agreed, but because her trust mattered deeply. In that silent, charged moment, where unspoken feelings felt almost louder than words, Dylan recognized that this conversation marked an important turning point. Whether they pursued this path or not, something essential was shifting between them. In the days that followed, Dylan found himself returning to that conversation again and again. He couldn't shake the image of Sophie's face as she shared her thoughts. Despite his reservations, he began to understand that her proposal reflected a deeper yearning, a desire to nurture their bond, to address something she felt but struggled to articulate. The notion of stepping inside a swingers club unsettled him. He thought carefully about what it might mean, not just for him personally, but for their marriage, for the foundation of trust and intimacy they had carefully built over time. Quietly, he began reading stories from other couples who had navigated similar choices, hoping to gain insight into what drew people into that world. Though he remained far from certain, Dylan wanted to be thoughtful and informed. He didn't want misunderstandings or unspoken fears to erode whatever decision they ultimately made. As the evening they had tentatively selected approached, Dylan wrestled with alternating waves of anxiety and curiosity. He reminded himself again and again that this could be an opportunity to see Sophie from a different perspective, to rediscover aspects of their relationship that routine might have dulled. Determined to confront his fears head-on, he imagined the setting, the people they might meet, and the emotions he could experience witnessing Sophie in that environment. He questioned his own limits, wondering where his boundaries truly lay, what he could accept, and what might feel like too much. In his mind, he rehearsed every aspect of the situation, trying to prepare himself emotionally for what lay ahead. Then the evening finally arrived. As he and Sophie dressed and prepared to embark on this uncertain journey together, Dylan did his best to remain calm, ready to step forward into this new chapter with her by his side. During the drive to the club, a heavy silence settled between them. Both were lost in their own reflections, gazes fixed on the uncertain possibilities the night ahead might hold. When their eyes met briefly, a blend of hesitation and expectation passed between them, neither fully knowing what awaited. This was uncharted territory for both, a circumstance that drew them together while, at the same time, subtly creating a distance. When they arrived, Dylan was surprised by the club's refinement. It didn't resemble the clichés he had pictured. Rather, the place exuded a polished elegance, its atmosphere crafted to be both alluring and mysterious. Dim lights bathed the room in a soft glow, while gentle music created an almost ethereal ambiance. Guests in tasteful attire moved quietly among one another, many exuding the same nervous energy he felt. That realization comforted him. Unease here was clearly common. As they stepped inside, Sophie slipped her hand into Dylan's and offered a warm, encouraging smile, a look that seemed to ask him to be strong for her, even as she lent him her own courage. He squeezed her fingers in return, and together they crossed into the depths of the club, where the night's true experience awaited. Dylan's gaze swept across the room, trying to absorb everything, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider, as though he were observing from beyond a pane of glass. His senses became acute, catching every furtive glance and subtle smile exchanged nearby, as if the entire scene unfolded in another reality. As they ventured further inside, a server approached with drinks. They accepted, raising their glasses in a cautious toast. The alcohol sharpened the surreal quality of the moment, and Dylan sensed that this evening would probe not only the strength of their relationship, but also his own self-awareness. Tonight promised to test his beliefs, expose the foundations of his values, and perhaps reveal how far he was truly willing to go for love. When they began to interact with other couples, Dylan observed something unexpected. Sophie seemed utterly at ease. Her smile was genuine, her words smooth and confident, and she appeared completely comfortable in this setting. Here, she exuded a confidence he rarely saw elsewhere. As he watched her, a complex swirl of admiration and discomfort stirred within him. It was as though he was glimpsing a part of her long hidden from view, only now revealed. Despite his best efforts to loosen up and engage, Dylan felt a barrier within, a quiet resistance that kept him apart from the experience. Sophie allowed herself to sink into the mood of the place, but Dylan began to question whether what she was seeking here was something he could provide. Watching her interactions and absorbing the atmosphere, he started to realize that this night wasn't simply an exploration for Sophie, it was becoming a personal reckoning for him as well. And though he tried to suppress it, he couldn't escape the sense that they were slowly drifting apart, as if every step deeper into this environment quietly widened the gap between them. The true difficulty of the night lay in the pull between curiosity and discomfort, between his desire to fulfill her expectations and his own growing unease. Even without knowing how the evening would end, he felt that something essential had already shifted, possibly beyond repair. As the night progressed, Dylan did his best to blend into the surroundings, though he became increasingly conscious of the emotional distance growing between them. Sophie, by contrast, navigated the scene effortlessly, as though she belonged there entirely. Dylan, meanwhile, felt awkward and ill-suited to the part he was trying to play. What Sophie had proposed as a shared experience meant to bring them closer was beginning to feel, to Dylan, more like an emotional test of endurance. At one point, a sociable couple struck up a conversation. Dylan watched as Sophie engaged with them easily, laughing readily, offering thoughtful remarks, and listening with genuine interest. Dylan, in contrast, responded politely but minimally. Small nods, faint smiles. He felt himself struggling to appear natural, though every word felt forced. Eventually, the couple invited them to join them in a quieter spot for a more private chat over drinks. Dylan hesitated briefly, but upon seeing Sophie's eager expression, he followed. The private lounge they entered was furnished with plush couches and bathed in warm, dim lighting that encouraged closeness. But for Dylan, the cozy atmosphere only magnified his discomfort, leaving him feeling even more exposed and out of place. While Sophie and the couple chatted animatedly, Dylan concentrated on maintaining his composure. He watched Sophie's animated gestures, her easy laughter, her openness with these near strangers, and was struck by the realization that he hadn't seen this side of her in quite some time. The thought struck him hard, stirring an unexpected rush of emotions, sadness, jealousy, and regret, as though something important was slipping through his fingers, and he was powerless to stop it. At one point, Sophie turned and asked him what he thought of their new acquaintances. Dylan managed to smile and said they seemed interesting, but even to his own ears, the words sounded empty. Sophie sensed this instantly. A shadow of concern passed over her features. She gently took his hand, but instead of offering comfort, the gesture only deepened his feeling of separation. It felt less like a bridge between them and more like a quiet acknowledgement of how far apart they already were. Two people sitting side by side but emotionally worlds apart. Their new friends began sharing stories about how visiting places like this had strengthened their relationship, helping them discover hidden parts of themselves and their connection. Dylan listened in silence, watching Sophie absorb every word with genuine curiosity and interest. He caught a subtle spark in her eyes, something that went beyond mere curiosity, as though she was finally encountering something she had unknowingly been searching for. In that moment, Dylan realized that Sophie was following a path of her own, one that rose above their relationship and possibly no longer included him in the way he had once imagined. As she moved forward on this journey, Dylan felt himself pushed to the sidelines, reduced to a spectator offering quiet support rather than a true participant in her unfolding experience. The growing estrangement in his own marriage, as he watched his wife gradually drift out of reach, was almost too painful to endure. Sitting there, listening to the conversation swirling around him, Dylan felt more and more like an outsider looking in on Sophie's happiness and sense of purpose, disconnected from it all. It was as if an invisible barrier had formed between them, turning what could have been a shared experience into something isolating and sorrowful. And as their exchange continued, he silently wondered how much longer it would take before he admitted that the strong connection they once shared was unraveling in ways that might prove irreparable. Soon, Dylan's deepest fear came to life. In that fragile space between doubt and desire, he yielded to his own insecurities. The couple they met at the club radiated confidence and charm, and their magnetic presence steadily eroded what little resistance Dylan still had. What began as an evening marked by awkward discomfort unexpectedly transformed into something neither he nor Sophie had planned for, drawing them across a boundary he once believed could never be crossed. As the night wore on and dawn approached, Dylan and Sophie became immersed in an intense encounter with the other couple. The experience felt both surreal and overpowering, and while initial exhaustion lingered, an unexpected sense of connection began to surface. But even as he surrendered himself to that night, Dylan couldn't ignore the quiet realization that something essential inside him was breaking. That by choosing this path, he was giving up a part of himself he would never recover. When morning came, Dylan woke beneath the heavy weight of his own decisions, his conscience dragging him down like a stone. The soft morning light seemed to illuminate every truth he wished he could conceal, even from himself. Every moment of the previous night remained vivid and sharp in his mind, and he felt trapped in a storm of conflicting emotions that refused to ease. Next to him, Sophie still lay asleep, her expression peaceful and spent. The serenity on her face cut deeply into him. Perhaps for her, the night had brought release. For Dylan, though, it carried a burden that threatened to shake the very core of his identity. Rising quietly, he retreated to the kitchen, seeking comfort in familiar, mundane movements that felt oddly disconnected from the turmoil within. He questioned what had led him to go so far. Was it desire, curiosity, or simply fear of losing Sophie as she pursued her own rediscovery? Gazing out the window, he was struck by how tangible the distance between them had become, an invisible boundary that now felt impossible to ignore. No matter how he tried to rationalize it, the truth remained clear. The experience hadn't drawn them closer as he had hoped. Instead, he felt more isolated than ever, as if he had become a stranger adrift in his own life. In the days that followed, Dylan wrestled with a tangle of emotions. The house, once a refuge they shared, now felt foreign and cold, as though the weight of what had transpired hung in the very air. He forced himself to maintain the routines of daily life, pretending that nothing had changed when he was around Sophie, but beneath the surface, every attempt at normalcy collapsed into heavy silence. Their glances were filled with a tension neither could ease, and the silence between them spoke more loudly than any argument might have. Dylan recognized that what had happened that night had left behind a deep, unseen wound, a chasm that no casual conversation could ever bridge. As the days passed, he began to scrutinize every decision that had brought them to this point. In his quiet moments alone, he reflected on why he had agreed to that night, what Sophie had been seeking, and how they had ended up in such a fragile and unsettling place. He tried to justify his choices, to trace each step back to its origin, but his thoughts were laced with regret and resentment. Meanwhile, he couldn't help but observe that Sophie seemed calmer, as if the experience had unburdened her, granting her something she had needed. This contrast only served to heighten his confusion. It felt as though he had set a profound and irreversible shift in motion without fully understanding its consequences. Night after night, Dylan lay awake, replaying the events of that evening in his mind. Watching Sophie sleep peacefully beside him, he couldn't shake the creeping doubt. Had he ever really known her at all? The growing sense of disconnection gnawed at him as he came to accept that she was walking a path that no longer ran parallel to his own. With painful clarity, he understood that the journey he had believed might draw them back together was instead revealing how far they had already drifted apart. The life they shared now felt precarious beneath him, as if everything familiar was dissolving into uncertainty and emptiness. At last, Dylan could no longer avoid confronting what had happened between them. The sleepless nights, the oppressive quiet, and the haunting memory of that pivotal evening had all converged into a pressure he could no longer withstand. Then, on a quiet afternoon, he found Sophie sitting on the couch, lost in thought, and in that moment, he knew it was time to finally face the truth they had both been trying not to see. Without hesitation, he sat beside her, his face solemn, conveying that this time they needed to speak with complete honesty, openly, without holding back. As Sophie met his eyes, Dylan caught a look he couldn't quite interpret. Was it regret, sadness, or perhaps a quiet surrender to what was coming? He started to reveal what had been weighing on him over the past weeks, a feeling that whatever bond they shared was slipping through his fingers. He admitted the unease that had crept into his days, how a widening distance between them had left him feeling more adrift than ever. He struggled to explain that their recent visits to the club, which she had hoped would breathe life into them, had only left him feeling lost, disconnected from the person he thought he was. In reply, Sophie spoke softly, saying she understood what he was expressing. But for her, the club wasn't an attempt to escape him. It had been a way to unearth parts of herself that had long been buried. She acknowledged that the freedom she discovered there was unlike anything she had known before. And although she had wished he could have joined her in that journey, she now realized that something essential between them had shifted. It was as if the experience had revealed a deep divide that had been present all along, one they had silently agreed to overlook for years. Her words struck Dylan deeply, leaving him shaken. In that instant, it became clear to him that he may never have truly understood Sophie's deepest needs, or even his own. As she spoke of her yearning for freedom, he became aware that his own longing was for security, closeness, and connection, something that now seemed far beyond reach. With every word she spoke, the distance between them seemed to widen, and he felt powerless to close the gap. Their conversation ended in a heavy, lingering silence. When their eyes met for what felt like the final time, they both understood they had reached an irreversible juncture, a moment from which there would be no turning back. Dylan gently took her hand for a brief moment, but the touch felt empty, like a faint echo of a closeness that had already vanished. Without another word, they rose together, and a few days later, they quietly made their way to a lawyer's office. Both understood that the life they had shared, rich in companionship and affection, had reached its formal conclusion. After they formally agreed to separate, Dylan sank into a quiet grief. Though he knew deep down that this end had been unavoidable, he found himself haunted by the memories of what they had once shared. Letting go of the story that had defined much of his life was anything but simple. Each morning, he awoke surrounded by traces of Sophie, the sound of her laughter still lingering in his thoughts, the familiar fragrance of her perfume clinging to the pillow, the memory of their late-night conversations that now felt irrevocably part of the past. He attempted to find purpose in new routines, but a growing emptiness crept into his days. The future loomed before him, uncertain and heavy, and he struggled to envision how he might begin again. The days following the divorce dragged on with a numbing slowness, while the nights stretched even longer, weighed down by silences that could no longer be ignored. In his solitude, he replayed their life together, the joyful times, the conflicts, even the minor disagreements, all of which now felt fragile and strangely precious. It was as though he was grasping for some lasting essence of what they had shared, something to anchor him as he drifted away from what he once believed was indestructible. One morning, hoping to clear his head, Dylan wandered through a park filled with the laughter of children, couples walking hand in hand, families enjoying simple pleasures. He watched them quietly, and an unexpected, deeper wave of sorrow overtook him. It was then that he began to understand what this chapter of his life was teaching him, that the true value of love lay not just in dramatic gestures or major decisions, but in the small, ordinary moments he had too often overlooked. A sharp ache settled within him as he recognized that in his attempt to preserve their relationship on his own terms, he had failed to see that Sophie had long needed something he couldn't give her. This realization did not bring immediate comfort, but it opened his eyes to a new understanding. He began to see that although their relationship had ended, it had left an indelible mark on him, a lesson he would carry with him as he moved forward. This painful ending revealed to him that love is much more than sharing experiences. It demands respect, empathy, and above all, an acceptance of the differences that make each person unique. Though grief remained close, Dylan slowly came to appreciate that their years together had changed him in ways he had never anticipated, reshaping his understanding of what it truly means to care for someone. And so, with careful, tentative steps, Dylan began to rebuild his life.